those personality tests where you get two choices and somehow it's supposed to tell you something about yourself? Things like, what's your favorite thing to do on a Saturday night? Catch the latest action thriller or curl up with a good book? Vanilla ice cream or rocky road? Hot dogs or hamburgers? I'm not sure what else. But one of the questions they always ask is about your favorite vacation spot. Mountains or beaches, it asks. And on this one, I never waver. I've got nothing against beaches, but I've always been a mountain guy. I've lived within a half-hour's drive of either the Appalachian or the Pacific Crest Trail since I finished college. And that perhaps explains why, for me, Joe O'Brien Field was love at first sight. There's nothing particularly impressive about the ballpark. The Baseball America directory listed its capacity as 1,500 people in 1991. A bit more seating has been added since, but that tied it with league mate Princeton for the smallest park in minor league baseball at the time. There was no interesting architecture. There were no tempting regional concessions that I recall, no furry mascots. If Joe O'Brien Field, which now goes by the name Northeast Community Credit Union Ballpark, were off an interstate highway somewhere, Ohio let's say, you'd pass it by without ever looking twice. But as it happened, they put the field on just about the prettiest piece of land we saw that summer. Only 3 or 4 others could rival it in my book, and one of those towns we moved to the next year. This Thursday evening was the third of 3 straight days of 2 parks in the same day, and we were nearing the end of our run through the Appalachian League and would reach a milestone later that night. The vagaries of minor league scheduling were working against us that day. We had been, just 2 days earlier, within a few miles of the 2 parks that we would see that evening, but the Elizabethton Twins had been on the road for the first 6 games of the 1991 season, and thus, that Thursday night was our first chance to see them. We had to drive back down from Bluefield, where we had spent the previous night, to do it. We set up camp somewhere and headed for Elizabethton, a town I had never heard of before we began planning this trip. We have arrived at stadium number 88 on Sports Tour. This is Joe O'Brien Field in Elizabethton, Tennessee, the home of the Elizabethton Twins. In the first of 2 games here tonight. Some 8 miles to the west lies the city of Johnson City, where we'll see the Johnson City Cardinals also tonight. And a very picturesque ballpark in the hills of Tennessee. A beautiful night. My son Alistair, who is 12, makes very good videos, though his are usually about airplanes. He's got crystal clear, high-def videotape that he shot with a GoPro and edited with my wife's Mac, and I watch them sometimes and think, why doesn't this series look like that? There are probably a few reasons for this, but tops on the list is the fact that this stuff was shot almost 30 years ago, and both cameras and the media that recorded on have improved dramatically since then. Even so, I think these pictures explain why I fell in love with the place.
Come on, you heard over 2.
The view over the fence from right to left field in O'Brien Field here in Elizabethton, Tennessee is as pretty as any of the parks we've seen. In fact, I could see myself coming to this park sometimes more to watch the scenery than watch the game. Soon after we were inside that night, Sue and I were invited to do an inning of play-by-play with the guys broadcasting the home opener for the Elizabethton Twins. I went first in the top half of the inning, and then it was Sue's turn.
We got a rather warm welcome here in Elizabethton, Tennessee. And here we see Bill doing play-by-play on the radio.
I can tell you what, Sue's back here taping this, so we might all be on ESPN.
Here's the 0-1 pitch. This one's hit right out the third baseman. Looks like he's on the line, and that comes into play with 2 outs here in the top of the third. He is the Kingsport Mets right fielder.
and walked back in the first inning.
Making the match to right fielder, Ty Quillen.
Sue Essler, take it away, Sue.
Ramon Valletti leading off, Sue. We got Brad Shore on down.
Well done, Suze.
Valletti's first appearance tonight.
Mine too.
I recall that Sue enjoyed being asked, but found that radio play-by-play was not her thing. But since I had always wanted to be a play-by-play guy, I liked doing it. However, that inning and the time it took to get it all set up ate up most of our time at Elizabethton that night. I have few regrets about this. As I said earlier in the series, at this point in the trip, it wasn't about Bill Crabe and Sue Essler anymore. It was about Bill and Sue being Bill and Sue, and if I was our role to do play-by-play or dizzy bat races or sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, then we were very happy to do it. But it did mean that we didn't ever get a chance to go over and check out the beautiful river that runs just beyond the third baseline. That's the Watauga River, well known in the region for both fly fishing and rafting, and I took these pictures when I did have a little more time on my 2003 trip. That night, the fog rolled in over the river, creating an even more dramatic effect for this already amazing place. Reluctantly, though, the fifth inning came and we headed out for our 8-mile trip over to Johnson City. The Kingsport Mets were to build on the 3-0 lead they had when we left, and they went on to a 5-0 victory. And now from the home season opening game in Elizabethton between the Twins and the Kingsport Mets, we shift gears to Johnson City, some 8 miles away, for the Cardinals and the Bristol Tigers. This is Howard Johnson Field in Johnson City, Tennessee. And although it may look like a small park, it plays a big part to us. This is stadium number 89 on Sports Tour, which is the halfway point of the 178 parks we'll see this summer. Howard Johnson Field, the home of the Johnson City Cardinals.
Is number 231.
Which, of course, are the Appalachian League affiliates of the St. Louis Cardinals. Johnson City is quite a bit larger than Elizabethton, and Howard Johnson Field, now known as TVA Credit Union Ballpark, lacks the bucolic charm of its neighbor. It does feel like a much bigger stadium, though, with a covered grandstand and lots of seating down both sides. I think we arrived in the 6th inning of the Johnson City Cardinals' eventual victory that night, but even before we broke out the camera, we spotted something we hadn't seen anywhere before, and I don't recall seeing again.
The Johnson City Cardinals seem to have the most unique right field that we've seen on the trip. They have this hill going up. I wonder if any players ran up there to catch any fly balls. They'd make a great play if they did. We've definitely never seen a right field like that, and I don't know if we'll see another one like that. It is rather unique. I don't think the players would like it too much.
Berms have become all the rage in stadium design these days, but they're almost always outside the playing field, not part of it. At Minute Maid Park in Houston, they built a small hill into the design of center field and named Tal's Hill after former team executive Tal Smith. However, that hill was removed in 2015, and I don't think any exist in professional baseball today. The right field hill was still in Johnson City when I came back in 2003, and I got some pictures of it in the daylight. But in 2010, it was smoothed over as part of a construction project next door. A little later that night, Sue came across another growing legend in the South, but this one was not a popular one.
One thing we've noticed in the Southeast are these vines that seem to grow everywhere along the roads. And here we see an example of them. They sort of take over everything, and here they're overtaking one of the billboards in the outfield. These are very common down here in this part of the country. Pretty soon we won't be able to see the billboard here.
There's a metaphor waiting to happen here somewhere about kudzu overtaking the Marlboro Man, but Sue didn't offer it that night, and I'll leave it to the meme makers now. Sue did dig into yet another park with a storied history, though.
Howard Johnson Field here has had a professional baseball team here for 51 consecutive years in the Appalachian League, which is really an amazing amount of time for a team to be at one park at this level.
Truth be told, both Elizabethton and Johnson City have amazing baseball histories. Last night I lamented the end of the long and historic partnership between Bluefield and the Baltimore Orioles. But in both of these towns, the relationships are almost as long. O'Brien Field opened in 1974 to be the home of the Elizabethton Twins, and it has been so ever since, 46 years. Professional baseball in Elizabethton goes back way further, though. The Elizabethton Betsy Red Sox began play in the town in 1937. And that was the exact year that the Johnson City Cardinals began to play. And although there were some other affiliations and team names over the years, Johnson City has been affiliated with the St. Louis Cardinals continuously since 1975. The 1990 Elizabethton Twins had the best record in all of professional baseball. That team went an incredible 51-16 and stormed to the Appy Championship. But the following year, on our trip, they had returned to earth. They eventually rebounded from a poor 1-6 start in the way we saw them. But they finished 39-29, and that was only good for fourth that year. The team did have Eddie Guardado pitching for them in his first professional season. He went on to a career of almost 20 years in the majors as a lefty out of the bullpen. Johnson City was a little better than the Twins in 1991. They ended up third in the Appy League that year and missed the championship series by just one game. Dimitri Young, who went on to hit 171 Major League home runs in 13 seasons, eventually played for the Cardinals that season. He had been the team's #1 draft pick out of high school that spring, but he hadn't yet joined Johnson City when we saw them. Doing a bit of research and preparation for today's video yielded 3 stories I highly recommend. The first is about a guy named David McQueen. As of 2018, according to the article, he had worked for the Elizabethton Parks and Rec Department for 33 years and is the head groundskeeper for the Twins. He lives in the White House that is plainly visible in this video beyond the outfield wall, and he's had multiple windows break from long moonshots over the years. Next, there's a story from the Bristol Herald-Courier about when and why the famous hill was removed in Johnson City. I'm glad I saw it while it was there, but the story talks with some folks who experienced the challenges of that hill firsthand. Finally, there's this story. If you ever wanted to know more about kudzu, this article from Smithsonian Magazine is for you. It turns out, according to this account anyway, that it doesn't eat a southern city every year. You can find links to all of those on today's blog post that goes along with this video at findamerica.org/LMT2020. The Johnson City Cardinals wrapped up a victory that night. I made a new friend, and Bill and Sue's excellent adventure reached a milestone moment.
Well, this is the end of the game here in Johnson City, and the Johnson City Cardinals were 8-4 winners or so. Is that the final score, 8-4? Is the final score 8-4? 9-4. The Johnson City Cardinals were 9-4 winners over the Bristol Tigers tonight, and this was stadium number 89, so it was kind of neat to be here. We have 89 parks down and 89 to go between now and the end of the season, and it's been a great trip so far. Hope we can keep going.